My mother stood at the head of the dining table, holding up her wine glass, and said, in front of my aunts, my cousins, my grandmother, and my brother's girlfriend, to Kieran, the child I always knew would make us proud. I was sitting 3 seats away. Nobody looked at me. I want to be clear about something. I was 31 years old when that happened. I had my own apartment in East Vancouver. I had been paying my own way since I was 22. I had never asked them for a single thing after I left for university. And still sitting at that table, I felt exactly like I was 12 years old again. Invisible, somehow both present and erased at the same time. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning because the beginning matters. I grew up in a suburb outside of Calgary, the kind of neighborhood where everyone has a 2-car garage and a Costco membership and strong opinions about the Flames. My parents were both in finance. My dad worked in commercial lending at one of the big 5 banks for 26 years. My mother managed a wealth advisory office. They were not rich in the way people mean when they say rich, but they were comfortable and they knew it, and they made sure we knew it too. My brother Kieran is 4 years younger than me. When we were kids, he was funny and loud and charming in the way that certain boys just are. The kind of kid teachers remember, the kind coaches fight over. I was quieter. I read a lot. I got good grades without making noise about it. Looking back, I think my parents genuinely did not know what to do with a child who didn't need to be pushed, because all their energy went toward Kieran, who needed to be pushed constantly and rewarded lavishly each time he moved 2 inches forward. He got a car for his 17th birthday. I got a card with $40 in it for mine. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself a lot of things. I left for UBC when I was 18. Biochemistry, then a master's in pharmaceutical sciences. My parents came to my undergrad convocation. My mother wore a blazer she'd also worn to a client dinner the week before. My dad shook my hand and said, "Good job, kiddo." That was it. When Kieran finished his business degree 2 years later, they threw him a party with a caterer and a rented tent in the backyard. My aunt flew in from Toronto. There was a slideshow. I'm not saying that to sound bitter. I genuinely am not anymore. I'm saying it because it's the context for everything that came after, and without it, none of this makes sense. After my master's, I went into medical affairs at a mid-sized pharmaceutical company based in Burnaby. I was 25. I was the youngest person in my department by about 6 years. I worked hard, not in a grinding, joyless way, but because I actually loved the work. I love the intersection of science and communication. I love translating complex clinical data into something a physician can actually use. I was good at it in a way I hadn't been good at many things before, and that feeling of being genuinely competent at something was new enough that I held on to it carefully. My parents knew I worked in pharma. That was essentially the extent of what they knew. "You work in drugs?" my dad said once at Christmas. He laughed when he said it. "Medical affairs," I told him. Right. He'd already turned back to the football game. Meanwhile, Kieran had gotten a job at a boutique investment firm in Calgary after graduating. He was doing well, entry-level, but it was a recognizable name, and my parents talked about it constantly. At every family dinner, every phone call, every casual mention, Kieran's firm, Kieran's clients, Kieran's team. My mother started referring to him as our finance guy at social gatherings, which I found interesting given that she worked in finance herself and I had a graduate degree in a scientific field. But fine. I want to be honest about one more thing before I get to the part that actually matters. I did not tell my family about the promotion. When I was 28, I was promoted to Director of Medical Affairs for the Canadian market. It was a significant role. It came with a team of 12, a budget I still sometimes can't believe I'm responsible for, and a level of involvement in drug approval processes that most people my age in this industry don't see for another decade. I was proud of it. I celebrated with my 2 closest friends over dinner at a restaurant in Gastown, and I posted nothing on social media, and I did not call my parents. Part of that was self-protection. Part of it was exhaustion. The exhaustion of sharing things with people who don't know how to receive them. And part of it, if I'm being completely honest, was that I had started to feel something shift in me. Not anger exactly, more like a quiet decision. I didn't need their validation. I had stopped needing it somewhere around 26, and by 28, I had gotten comfortable with that. So they didn't know, and I let them not know. The engagement party was my brother's idea. He'd been with his girlfriend Margot for 3 years. She's originally from Winnipeg, does something in urban planning, genuinely lovely person. And when they got engaged last fall, my mother immediately started planning a celebration. Dinner at my parents' house, immediate family plus a few close friends. Nothing huge. Just 40-something people in a house that comfortably holds 25. I was invited. Of course I was invited. I am the daughter. I show up. I drove down from Vancouver. That's an 11-hour drive, and I did it over 2 days because I'm not 23 anymore and I don't enjoy suffering the way I used to. I stayed at a hotel in the city rather than my parents' house, which I've been doing for years now. It's easier for everyone, I think, even if my mother always makes a small comment about it. She made the comment when I arrived. "You could have stayed here," she said at the door as a greeting. "I know," I said. "It's good to see you." She hugged me briefly and then called past my shoulder for Kieran. The house was already full when I got there. My dad's brother and his wife were there with their teenage kids. My mother's sister, my Aunt Bev, had come down from Edmonton with her husband. There were a few couples I half recognized from my parents' social circle. And Margot's family, her parents, who had driven from Winnipeg, and her older sister, who I'll get to in a moment. Her name was Sylvia. I didn't know much about her before that evening. Margot had mentioned her in passing, something about working in healthcare, being based in Toronto, traveling a lot. I registered this the way you register most peripheral information about future in-laws, vaguely, temporarily. The dinner itself was long. My mother had catered it, which she does when she wants to impress, and the food was good. Cedar planked salmon, roasted vegetables, bread from a bakery she'd driven 40 minutes to get to. I sat at the end of the table nearest the kitchen, which is where I always end up at these things. Not because anyone explicitly put me there. Just the way the seating sorted itself out. Somehow, every single time. I had a glass of wine and made conversation with my aunt and watched my parents orbit around Kieran and Margot the way they always do. And I felt the particular low-grade dissociation that I've learned to recognize in myself at family events. The one where I'm physically present, but emotionally about 2 feet to the left of my body. Then my mother stood up with her wine glass. She talked about Kieran for 4 minutes. I counted. She talked about how proud they were, how he'd always been driven, how they knew from the beginning he was going to do something meaningful. She said he was the heart of this family. She said watching him build his life had been the great joy of her parenting. She did not mention me. Not once. Not an acknowledgement, not a glance, not a, and of course we're proud of both our children. Nothing. I sat there with my glass of wine and my hands folded in my lap, and I looked at the table and I thought, okay. All right, this is still what this is. Kieran, to his credit, looked uncomfortable. He caught my eye across the table, and I saw something in his face. Not quite apology, but awareness. That was new. He'd been in a relationship with a good person for 3 years, and I think Margot had been quietly doing some work on him, because the Kieran I grew up with would not have noticed, or wouldn't have cared if he did. After dinner, people migrated into the living room and the back patio. I helped clear a few plates, habit, and ended up in the kitchen for a few minutes, grateful for the quiet. That's where Margot's sister found me. Sylvia was tall, somewhere in her mid-30s, with the slightly distracted energy of someone who is constantly thinking about several things at once. She'd been at the far end of the table all evening, and we hadn't spoken yet. She came in for another glass of water and stopped when she saw me. "You're Kieran's sister," she said. "Not a question." "I am," I said. "Tess." "Sylvia." She filled her glass and leaned against the counter. "What do you do?" It's such a Canadian question, so immediate, so practical. I've answered it 1,000 times, and I've given different versions of the answer depending on context. The short one for parties, The medium one for people who seem vaguely curious, the long one for people in the industry. I gave her the medium one. Medical affairs, I said. Pharmaceutical sector. I'm based in Vancouver. Something changed in her face. A small shift, like a door opening a crack. Which company? She said. I told her. She set her water glass down on the counter. You work at Meridian? Director of Medical Affairs, I said. Canadian market. Sylvia looked at me for a moment with an expression I didn't immediately know how to read. Then she said, very quietly, the Hartwell Protocol. That was your team. And there it was. I should explain. The Hartwell Protocol is a real-world evidence framework my team developed over about 2 years in collaboration with several academic medical centers across the country. It changed how a specific category of oncology drugs gets reviewed for formulary access in 4 provinces. It's not a household name. It wouldn't mean anything to most people at a dinner party. But in medical affairs, in oncology and health policy circles in this country, it's significant. The people who know about it know. That was us, I said. I work in health policy, Sylvia said. I'm with the Canadian Agency for Drugs and Technologies in Health. She paused. I have cited your team's work in 3 separate submissions. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. I didn't put it together, she said. She was shaking her head slightly, the way people do when they're recalculating something. Margot talks about you, but I didn't connect the name. She looked at me with what I can only describe as genuine curiosity. Your parents must be incredibly proud. The kitchen was quiet. From the living room, I could hear my mother laughing at something, and my dad's voice, and Kieran telling some story about a ski trip. I said, they're very proud of my brother. Sylvia looked at me for a long moment. I watched her understand. Tess, she said, and stopped. It's fine, I told her. It really is. But it wasn't, quite, and I think she could tell. She didn't make a scene. She's not that kind of person, and honestly, I wouldn't have wanted her to. But she did do something I didn't expect. She asked if I would come back into the living room with her. I followed her in. She went straight to where my parents were standing with Margot's parents, and she said in a completely natural, conversational tone, no fanfare, no announcement, I was just talking to Tess. I didn't realize until just now that she's the director behind the Hartwell Protocol. I've been using that framework for 2 years. The room didn't freeze dramatically the way it might in a movie. It was subtler than that. My dad looked up. My mother turned her head. Margot's mother said, "Oh?" with polite interest. Sylvia kept going. It's a genuinely groundbreaking piece of work. It's changed how oncology drugs get evaluated for public coverage in this country. I work in federal health policy and I cite it regularly. She said it the way she would say anything, informatively, clearly, without performance. Then she looked at my mother and said, "You must be so proud of her." My mother opened her mouth. Then she closed it. I have thought about that moment many times since. The closing of her mouth. The slight recalibration behind her eyes. She's a smart woman, my mother. She knew in that instant exactly how the preceding 4-hour dinner had looked to this woman who had just arrived in her family's orbit. She knew what the seating arrangement communicated. She knew what the toast had and hadn't said. She looked at me. "Of course we are," she said. Her voice was perfectly steady. But I was watching her face, and I saw the thing she couldn't hide. Not embarrassment exactly. Something worse than embarrassment. The recognition that she had failed to know her own daughter. That she had been so fixated on one child, that she had missed, entirely, who the other one had become. My dad crossed the room toward me. I wasn't sure what he was going to do. He put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Tell me more about this protocol." I looked at him. "You really want to know?" "I do," he said. So I told him, and he listened, actually listened, the way he hadn't listened to me in years, maybe ever. Margot's dad joined us, curious. Sylvia filled in the policy context. For about 20 minutes, I stood in my parents' living room and talked about the thing I had built, the thing I was proud of. the thing I had never brought home because there had never seemed to be any room for it. Kieran found me later, when people were getting their coats. "Tess," he said. He looked like he was choosing his words carefully. "I didn't know." "I know you didn't." "I should have asked. I should have. I just always sort of gone along with how Mom and Dad framed things, and I didn't stop to think about whether that was fair." He ran a hand through his hair. "It wasn't fair." I looked at my little brother. He's 37 and he's getting married, and he had his fiancée's sister calling him out, gently, by proxy, in his own engagement party. That takes something from a person. It rearranges things. "I appreciate you saying that," I said. And I meant it. He hugged me properly, for the first time in a long time. I let him. I drove back to my hotel at around 11. I sat in the parking lot for a few minutes with the engine off and the heater still running because it was October in Alberta and the cold comes fast. I wasn't crying. I wasn't even particularly sad. I was just sitting with it, the weight of being finally, briefly seen. The strange ache of it. My mother texted me the next morning. I was eating a hotel breakfast and scrolling through emails when my phone lit up. "I've been thinking about last night. I know I don't always show it well. Can we talk before you drive back?" I stared at the message for a while. I want to be fair to my mother. She is not a cruel person. She is a person who had a clear idea of what her family was supposed to look like and assigned roles accordingly. And the problem with assigned roles is that the person you assigned them to keeps growing in directions you didn't plan for. She didn't see me because she wasn't looking. That's a different thing than not caring, even if the effect is mostly the same. I typed back, "Yes, I'll come by at 10. We sat at the kitchen table with coffee and she said, "I didn't know how to talk about what you do. I told myself it was because I didn't understand it, but I think the truth is I didn't try." "No," I said. "You didn't." "I'm sorry, Tess." I looked at my mother's hands around her coffee mug. I've known those hands my whole life. "I'm not asking you to suddenly understand everything," I said. "I just want you to try. Ask me something about my work. When I answer, actually listen. That's it. That's all I'm asking." She nodded. There were tears in her eyes, which I wasn't expecting. "Tell me," she said, "about this protocol. From the beginning." So I did. It wasn't a fix. One conversation at a kitchen table doesn't undo 31 years of a certain kind of invisibility. But it was a door, and it was open, and I chose to walk through it. I drove home 2 days later, 11 hours back through the mountains, through the rain that started somewhere west of Kamloops, through the moment when Vancouver appeared in the distance through the gray, and I felt my shoulders drop. My work was still there. My team was still there. The framework we built was still doing what it was supposed to do, province by province, quietly, in the background of a healthcare system that most people never think about until they need it. My family didn't make me. I want to be clear about that too. I made me. But maybe there's something to be said for leaving the door open, even when you had every reason to close it. I keep Sylvia's business card on my desk, not as a reminder of that night, as a reminder of what it feels like when someone who doesn't owe you anything looks at your work and says, "This mattered." That's enough. That has always been enough. I've thought a lot about why I never told my parents about the promotion. At the time, I told myself it was self-protection, which was partly true. But I think the fuller truth is that I had spent so many years watching the things I cared about land in silence. No recognition, no follow-up questions, no real curiosity, that I stopped offering them. Not out of spite. Just out of a quiet, practical decision to stop putting something fragile in front of people who didn't know how to hold it. That's the thing about being overlooked for a long time. It doesn't make you angry, not really, not after a while. It makes you careful. You learn to build in private. You learn to find your own measures of what matters. And there's something genuinely good in that. Learning to validate your own work, to not need the applause. But there's also a cost to it that I didn't fully see until Sylvia said my name in that living room, and I felt something in my chest shift that I hadn't known was still tight. What I keep coming back to is this. The work was real, whether or not anyone in that house knew about it. The Hartwell Protocol existed. It was being used. 4 provinces. Real patience. That didn't change based on whether my mother mentioned me in a toast. And I think that's the thing I'd want anyone to understand who's ever sat at the end of a table and felt like they've been quietly edited out of the story. What you build in honesty and in effort, it holds. It does its work. The world sees it, even when the people closest to you don't. My mother not knowing wasn't a reflection of my worth. It was a reflection of where she was pointing her attention. Those are different things, and I wish I'd understood that distinction earlier, because I spent a lot of years letting her blind spot feel like my failing. Kieran said at the end of that night that he should have asked, that he'd gone along with how our parents framed things without stopping to question whether it was fair. That took something from him to say that out loud, in the middle of his own engagement party. I don't take that lightly. It's not easy to look at a family pattern you've benefited from and call it by its right name. That kind of honesty costs something, and I think it's the thing I respect most about where he's landed as a person. And my mother, sitting at the kitchen table the next morning with her hands around her coffee mug, asking me to start from the beginning, that mattered too. Not because it fixed anything, but because it was true. It was her actually trying, Mabel for the first time, to know me. I keep Sylvia's business card on my desk. I look at it sometimes when I'm in the middle of a hard week and I need a small reminder that the work is worth doing even when it's quiet. Someone who had no reason to say anything chose to say something anyway. That's a kind of integrity I want to carry forward. The willingness to name what's good when you see it, even when it's inconvenient, even when the room gets a little awkward after. I drove home through the mountains in the rain and I felt, for the first time in a long time, like the whole shape of my life made sense to me. That's enough. It really is.